Simon is Head of Education Development at the University of Greenwich. He's responsible for policy and strategy on learning and teaching excellence. He has established and edits several educational journals and is co-author of the Larnaca Declaration on Learning Design, published in 2016 as a book, Learning Design, Conceptualizing a Framework for Teaching and Learning Online.
So to be with friends and to talk to you as friends, hopefully. My name's Simon Walker, I'm from the University of Greenwich. And if you've never been to the University of Greenwich, this is one of our campuses. It's on the River Thames. I like this image because it's a little sea of green, really, in a kind of a mad world facing Canary Wharf. And you probably know it better than you think. I need to move this one on because it's a constant film set, so you'll recognise the university in many, many ways. However, that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm here to talk to you about shift happens, higher education in the post-digital age, actually, post-digital era, which I think often people will say, hold on, I can hardly work one of these phones. How come we're in the post-digital era already? But I think that certainly from what Caroline was saying, we certainly find ourselves in that sort of in that era where the digital is amongst us, whether we like it or not. And of course, we are trying to deal with some of those issues as best we can do. I called this title of the talk "Shift Happens." You have to be careful about the reading the F in shift, because I think that sometimes we are in this kind of middle of this. Well, I would say the middle. Hopefully, it's the middle, and there will be an end to it. But there is a sense that universities are under a lot of pressure at the moment, and there's lots and lots of changes. And any text you've probably picked up in the last 10 years really around higher education talks about an unprecedented time of change in higher education. And it seems to me that it's gathering pace. So there was in one of your texts you had this piece about retaining the human and embracing change, and I thought that was a really, really nice kind of text really to talk about, because I think that sometimes technology is being used to sort of almost dehumanize us, and I suppose my talk is more to do with, well, how do we move forward collectively as a group of staff, professional services staff and students, to get the things that we want to do. I've added this bit here: there was no mercy, they gave no quarter, and I'm not quite sure whether that's vice-chancellors who are giving no mercy and no quarter, or students, or government, or ourselves, given we're in quite a competitive market, and you can take whatever you like for that one. So I've got two clickers here, one for the laser printer and one for the pass on. If I really wanted to talk to you about this issue around how do we cope with the shift, this is the image I'd really like to produce, because it's around that sort of transformation of students, around motivated people who are changing their lives and coming out with very, very sort of well-equipped skills, able to deal with the future of life and thrive in the future of life. And so what I'd like to talk to you about then is trying to address some of those sorts of issues, really, amongst this context, which probably is best summed up by the LSE's most famous alumni, here, Mick Jagger, but taken up by Joe Johnson about not getting any satisfaction from universities. It was produced as a green paper, really, saying universities are poorly performing. You still hear it from Sam Gima as well now, that actually there's nothing that we can really do right. We've got it all wrong, and we need to really up our game and deliver exactly what we're supposed to be delivering, which is confusing, given that this green paper talked about teaching excellence, but didn't actually state what teaching excellence was. I think it maybe used the word excellence once. It's something that, I don't know if anyone remembers Sir David Watson, who was Vice-Chancellor of the University of Brighton, said you should only use the word excellence once and never about your own institution. And I think that's probably, we use it all the time here. I wrote the response to the university response to this paper, so I was quite close to the text. And it was very interesting looking at trying to do some sort of keyword counts on this one. And I counted the word innovation there about 93 times. And I think that gives us a sort of sense of actually what the government is trying to do. And we've talked a lot about innovation, I think, and how we deal with that. And that, of course, has led us on to this one. So change is about us. It's how we go about that change and how do we manage that change. I was interested to hear Paul Fellman's talk today about all the sort of stuff we might be coming into the future. That for me seems a long, long way, although I know that people are using VR, I know people are using simulations, but actually some of the students are quite resistant, some students are quite conservative. They want that sort of personal touch, they want that, them to be sort of managed, they're learning to be scaffolded in a very, very sort of tight way these days. And academics as well, the way they deal with change is interesting, I think. You often hear a sort of vice chancellor addressing a staff conference, and he'll say, "What do you want?" Or he or she, sorry, will say, "What do you want?" And it'll come back, "We want incremental change." "Oh, when do you want it?" "Well, in due course, 5, 10 years maybe. Change is not easy. But the TEF ship has sailed. We've now got whatever our Olympic medal for what the government has held up as a mirror against us, with maybe some supplementary text to mediate that. And whether it's made a difference is going to be very interesting. It seems that it hasn't made much of a difference to students. So if the TEF was all about producing student data for students to choose the courses, I'm not sure whether that's worked. But it has actually kick-started a lot of sort of interest in teaching. Or in some institutions, certainly in our institution, it has, I would say. And I know that probably in many institutions you're all going through sort of similar restructures to try and understand what that relationship is between TEF, REF, and KEF. During that year when we were moving into the TEF, there were about 30 students who were taken away by 7, 8 universities, mixed universities, to say, well, what is it about university education that you're really looking for? And this is the infographic that they came up to. I don't know if you can see it very well there, but because it's quite a strong light on that. But so they wanted sort of things like healthy buildings, campus, Wi-Fi, of course, that sort of link between training and career, so they could get the job they wanted. A lot around tech, for those of you very sure IT professionals very happy to hear about that. The slot is supposed to be called the Provocations slot, and I don't know how you provoke a librarian or IT professional except by saying your systems don't work and I'm not going to get out of the library. But certainly, around sort of enthusiastic staff. Yeah, how do you get enthusiastic staff during that sort of period of time of change? Interactive, engaging lectures and seminars. I think this one is very interesting. High quality learning together. That sort of sense around staff-student partnerships, students talking to one another, collaboration. We know what works. Aston studies has been repeated again, and it's that sort of close contact with staff, timely feedback, collaboration between students. All that stuff really works well. And then this big data business. So that's a kind of something which has come in quite recently. It's one of those things which is sort of, I think, has come into the zeitgeist in quite interesting ways. And you know it's there because there's lots of jokes being made around it now. One I heard recently was about a boy who goes up to Mark Zuckerberg and says, "Mr. Zuckerberg, my dad tells us you're snooping around us all." And Mark Zuckerberg says, "I'm really sorry, son, I'm afraid that's not your dad." But data science as well has got itself into a kind of a tricky sort of period. I heard someone talk about data science being a bit like teenage sex the other day, and in the sense that kind of no one quite knows how to do it, but everyone's talking about it, and everyone thinks everybody else is doing it, therefore they're saying that they're doing it. And I said that to a colleague, and she said, "Yeah, and actually it's not very good either." Let's move on. But big data, I would like to focus on a little bit. So we've got Bentham's panopticon here. Some people are talking about n equals all. So, we've got enough data points around all of us, and certainly coming into institutions, big ethical issues there for us, about what that means for us. It sort of reminds me a little bit about the Michael Curtis telling off of who's the actors? Moon's a Balloon guy, David Niven, about he was saying he has a Hungarian, Michael Curtis, and his language wasn't that great. And he said, you guys are all lousy bums, you're not listening to anything I'm saying, you think I know fuck nothing, but I know fuck all. And it sort of, don't be offended, because I know librarians swear an awful lot talking to Anne. But that sort of concept about n equals all is a really, really interesting one, I think. And we're now into some big data. But the issue for us, I think, is how we understand and interpret that data and our students' data. And there are a number of things which are going on at the moment in universities you may or may not be aware of. But the thing that I think there's a lot of noise in the system, and I found this very interesting. This is a piece of work by Kamal Mahroufi, who is an Iraqi artist who looked at the Iraq war around the sort of, what are we collecting around, what data are we collecting? And this was by time, and the little dots represent casualties in the war. So he did it by time, and then he did it by category, and this is the oranges are the civilians who were killed in the Iraq war. And I think there's if we're not careful, there's a lot of noise in our systems as well. If we're not very, very careful, and we don't get very, very clean data, which is really helping us to understand our students, it's going to be useless. However, having said that, I think there are data which is very important for stimulating discussion around what it is we're trying to do. And this is a piece of work by Kingston University. There's a number of different universities involved in this. It's called the Attainment Gap, Value Added, and the Inclusive Curriculum Framework project. And basically what it's doing is it's showing differences between BAME students and white students. And when everything is sort of taken into account, all the variables are taken into account, there's still this incredible gap between the attainment of white students and the attainment of BME students. And there's a sense that you're showing these dashboards to academic staff now and saying, so what's going on here? What do you put that down to? And there are some very, very interesting discussions. There was one quite recently, actually at Kingston, from an academic who taught English pastoral for literature. And there's that sense in English pastoral that it's a friendly place, it's quite privileged, you need money, you do horse riding, all those sorts of things. Whereas if you're teaching a mixed group of, from different countries, possibly refugees, the countryside is not the place you want to be in. And there's that sort of that conceptual differences between that. So there's a sense of, well, probably you understand why people may be not attaining as well if you haven't understood what those differences might be. This is the Open Universities dashboard, OU Analyze. You can see it, you can look at it. What it's telling you there is it's predictive, so it's saying which students might be in danger of failing. And what the Open University have done is been using this and looking at the teachers who've gone in and done something about these findings, contacted their students, worked with their students, and they're finding actually they are succeeding when they contact them, give them that individual attention. So the question then for the OU is, well, there's only 600 tutors who've used that so far. What do we do around the policy? So does every member of staff need to log in and look at that and make sure their students are doing well? And as Paul mentioned this morning, JISC are involved in this analytics, learner analytics project, which is picking up from attainment, from attendance, and from VLE data, trying to put that all together to give a similar picture, and that's a kind of a national sector. I think lots of us are quite cynical about that. Whether your student's going to go onto your study goal app and have a look and see, well, yeah, okay, my attendance was a bit low, I forgot I didn't go to the lecture last week, or whether there's something else going on there and who actually will be using this. However, given that students say, I know you're collecting data about us and we want you to use it, then I think we should be using it in ways in which will help them. Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, did a piece of work in 2015 that did suggest that actually students really, really do want us to tell them if they are failing, and some quite interesting data there. Okay, so lectures and seminars. See how much time I've got left, a minute. Okay, so the TEF has come along, and we think that there's a shift now, or there's a parity between research and teaching. And I'm not sure whether how deep that has gone into universities yet. This is an exercise I like to play with myself. Simple things amuse me. But if you type in research into your domain name, your university domain name, you will always come up with the glittering things that your university is doing. If you type in the word teaching, what do you think you get? Yeah, this is Cambridge. We need time to evolve. This is Stanford. Nobel, you see, the Nobel Prize. That's what universities are known for, of course, isn't it? Not so much their teaching. But try it on your university, and ours is exactly the same. Haven't managed to work out. We're not quite sure whether can we not describe teaching in some sort of way at a university level? Is it so diverse and so different? It may be the case. Or is there something that we can do, and we just haven't sort of found that that's what we need to do? And maybe students are not searching for it in the same way which we think they should be. I love this painting by Laurentius de Voltolina. It's King Henry of Germany giving a talk at the University of Bologna. You've probably seen this. And I don't know whether that much has changed, really. You got, people at the front doing the Facebooking here, guys asleep here, someone chatting up, over here, someone's sort of dreaming about food or sex or something like that. It's about if you count, there's about 5 people actually paying attention here. And I know someone showed some slides about a lecture theatre in Edinburgh, I think it was Paul, wasn't it? And whether that's actually changed at all. And probably not, because it's very, very expensive to change. University is one of those places where, the lectern was important because you had one source of information. That has changed so dramatically that we talk about students as distance learners if they're sitting at the back of a lecture theatre because they can hardly hear you and see your slides and things. This is another view of the 20th century from Jean-Marc Coté. Again, that sort of sense about, well, we can still fill up these empty vessels. Students don't need to bother doing anything, to learn. Hopefully, that is changing. Our conception about that is changing. Students are changing, taking notes in lots of different ways. But it's very, very difficult to change when you've got classrooms and lecture theatres that look a bit like this. These square tables here are just for exams. 2 weeks of exams, so students don't cheat from look at one another's papers. But actually, we have to suffer these for the rest of the year. So 2 weeks, and that's how we, that demands, that dictates our pedagogical approach. We have started to convert, as probably many universities have started to convert. And this is the same room, converted. It was very expensive to convert. It was a joint project with our Information Library Services, a very successful one, I would say. It was very interesting to see what the reaction of staff coming in to this room. when they first came in, they were timetabled to teach this. You had some staff saying, wow, this is fantastic, got 2 projectors, I can put different things on different projectors. These tables are amazing, we can get people to collaborate with them. And other staff came in, looked at it and said, I got to get out of here. Give me the old style room, because that I know how to teach in. So there is a sense again about how to change and how to support staff in that change as well. There are new pedagogies, and certainly a recent survey by some work by Sage, I'll talk about later, seems to suggest that academics, librarians, staff, and students are aware that there are changes as well. It's not just sitting in a lecture theatre or a seminar. This I find very, very interesting. It's team-based learning. It's being picked up by universities around the world. This is Nanyang University. It's a university started about 40 years ago. It's now, I think, maybe second in the rankings there. It's a course which is franchised by Imperial, but taught in a very different way. Students are given iPads. They're formed in groups from the word go for the whole of their 3 years. They've never had a student leave, and students are outperforming as well. Very interesting idea. Students are working against one another, and we've started to introduce this as well. And I was invited, we introduced this, and I was invited about 2 years later to see the economics class here, and I was just astonished by how everybody was totally engaged. So there was no sense that students were passive or could be passive in that sense. Yeah, so a recent piece of work by Sage for the sector, which you may or may not know about, was looking at what the perceptions of academics and teaching staff, particularly around the business models of publishing. So is a textbook still alive? What does it mean as a publisher to try and engage with universities now when they're going through these different changes? And they've come up with some very interesting findings, and the authors here have said that they're very, very happy to make this, this document available to everyone here at the conference, if anybody's interested in that. So moving on about what can we do and how do we sort of manage that change, I'd like to sort of end really by looking at the design of courses and what we need to really sort of think about there, because it's become very, very aware to me in the years I've been teaching in higher education that actually we don't pay enough attention to design. Burgess Senior and Moores did a very recent study about which of the NSS was the best predictor for overall satisfaction, and they found it was this one: courses well designed and running smoothly. But I do think it's very, very difficult to design a really good program because there's so many different aspects to it. This is sort of if IKEA produced a car, and it's a bit like where do we fit in all of this? So where do academics fit in? Where do professional services staff fit in? Where do IT fit in? Where do estates fit in? Where does how does the university kind of and its wider environment fit in to all that to produce a really stunning program? So I'll start with assessment design. So I've did some recent looking at what the NSS seem to be suggesting around assessment and feedback. It's always been a slight Achilles heel. And when NSS first started in 2005, we recognized that assessment feedback was very, very poorly thought of by students. So feedback was late, assessments were unclear, etc. And a lot of money, a lot of effort was put in, and it rose steadily. But this year, what's interesting, I don't know whether it's a hiccup, but there seems to be possibly a slight downturn. And I think it's probably I think it's quite clear that there will be a downturn, I suspect. I think there's lots of things going on there which suggest that there will be a downturn. One of the things that we've tried to do at Greenwich, like other institutions, is use a process called TESTER, which stands for the transformation of the experience of assessment students through assessment. And it's, we've adapted it in particular ways. So it's a very, very deep dive look at assessment. So we do student questionnaires, we do student focus groups, we interview staff, we do a quantitative and qualitative analysis of the feedback which is given on core courses. So we count the number of words, feedback is given, and then we do a qualitative analysis about, well, what are people saying, what are academics saying in that feedback? And then we produce a series of recommendations for the program team. It's very, very confidential, rightly so. But what we have found is that we've now done, for this piece of work, we did 125 programs. We're now on to about 160 or so. And what we found is, as we've amalgamated those, we found that it's a great sort of lever for change at an institutional level. So this is our top 10 at the University of Greenwich. The one that comes out most is clear goals and standards. So it's very clear to us that our students don't really understand what it is they need to do to get the best grades. So is it about the information they're given? Is it about the feedback they're given? Is it about assumptions that academic staff are making? Is it about the fairness of assessments, the validity of assessments, all those sorts of things? It encouraged us to have another look back then. But also things like assessment spread. That's something as well which we know that there are lots of choke points. There's a rise of student anxiety in institutions, and if we're not looking at the experience at program level, it's probably not surprising that there's that massive rise of stress with students. Ollie, could you play this? So this is something that we've developed at the university. It was a free Google sheet that we used to give out, and Google gave us an award for us, and then they took away the ability to visualize through high charts. So we can no longer give it away, but we knew we were onto something because we designed it for the university, and there it goes. And then it was picked up by about 192 different countries in the world, and used quite effectively. But what we've done now is we've just brought that in-house and we built it for our own institution because as soon as you put in your assessment dates, which we've now managed to do, huge hurdle, actually getting academics to put in when their due dates of assessments are. Can you play it?
Map My Assessment is an online tool developed by the University of Greenwich. It reveals the distribution of assessments across programmes and it helps staff to avoid assessment bunching.
Oh, okay. Didn't work. Not to worry. If you go back to the slides. So I don't know if you caught the lines there with blobs and triangles, and what it was trying to do was to say the blobs represents assessments, and if you're whatever you call it, module leader, course leader, unit leader, you're very, very intent on teaching the way in which you want your model to be taught. So you'll say, I want to teach in this way. This is the timetabling I need, and I need my assessment to be right here. And when every course leader, every module leader is doing the same thing, what you get is this real bunching. So in some programs, you're seeing a line of assessments here, and then staff complain. Sorry, Ali, don't worry. Then staff complain. Actually, students didn't turn up for the 2 weeks prior to my assessment. I wonder why that was the case, or they didn't do very well this year, and it's because they're sitting 4 or 5 assessments at the same time. And what we think is also happening is that staff are saying students will only work for marks. Therefore, whatever I do, I've got to summatively assess it. So they're actually adding more assessments in, making the situation worse. So we're hoping that this is now being built into the university's student management information system. So at least students can see what they're coming up against. So if they are having tight bunching, at least they can manage that bunching in some sort of way. Thanks, Ollie. If you can go back to the slides now. That's me, isn't it? Yeah. That's the tool, which I won't go into because I don't have time. But I think it's this bit which is the most important bit, I think. It's that formative assessment which we need to understand. And the clarity of goals and standards for us at Greenwich, knowing that that's our real weakness, is we now need to understand assessment design in the sense that formative assessment is going to be very closely linked to summative assessment. It's going to use marking criteria, it's going to have assessment rubrics around, so students will actually have an understanding of what that is, and before they get to the summative assessment and fall down there. Someone described formative assessment as a chef tasting the soup before the summative assessment when he or she gives it to somebody else to taste. But it's this bit. There's absolutely no point in doing assessment if students are not going to take account of the feedback. So we somehow have to develop a culture, an institutional culture, of acting on feedback. Coming back to now the sort of design of programs, again, it's something which I know that staff don't think so deeply about. So they will have a new program, they'll say, yeah, okay, we're going to give this many lectures and this many seminars, without really thinking through what are the real activities that their students are actually doing in those classes. And that's produced a small revolution around the way in which people are thinking about design. So not only just assessment design, but actually the design of activities to make learning really, really work. So in a lecture theatre, what are you doing in that lecture theatre? What are your students doing in that lecture theatre to engage with their learning activities? And how are you equipping them to come out with that transformed, with understanding what knowledge is and being able to use that knowledge? And I think this is probably where the librarians come in particular there. So delighted to hear, I love the SCONUL, 7 pillars. This is based on that. This is what our librarians and study skills are coming up with, and they really, really are making a very active attempt at engaging the program teams at that point of design. Because what they're saying is, okay, you can design the learning types that you're doing, but unless you're also designing these things in and knowing exactly where those things are happening, again, you're failing your students. You're not going to put a design which is actually working with students. So it's that sort of equipping of students in amazing kind of scaffold which you can develop with very, very well-designed programs that take them, from scratch, from increasingly sort of, students who don't know how to learn from coming from schools into that sort of questioning, critical stance, which we absolutely need in our desperate world. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Can I just thank both of our speakers? Thank you both. Two very different but really interesting presentations, I think. Well, I know. We have about 5 minutes for questions, if anyone would like to ask either Caroline or Simon any questions. Please say who you are and where you're from.
This one here.
Look.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from the University of Brighton. It's interesting to see you speak together because you're two very different sides of the university. One is very operational and the other is very much the research side. And it's nice to see you together because you're of the differences and also some of the similarities. So I wondered for each of you, in doing your work, you find an intransigence of opinion in one another's camps that makes it difficult for you to work together in a way where you can clearly express the values of the university and how you reflect those values in your work. And when I say values, I can lead you a little, and I can say that I hope those values are progressive, not in the sense of technical progress, but progressive in the sense of the suites of values. You talk about algorithmic bias, you talk about bringing different kinds of subject areas into digital humanities. You talk about the importance of recognizing the achievement gap. Those values are progressive values because you care about making sure that there's equality of opportunity, that there's happiness in students' lives, and you care about the environment, these progressive values.
Okay, I suppose one of the, I don't know if this answers the question, but I think one of the issues that people investigating digital transformation and teaching that a lot, which is what I do. I run an MA in New Developments in Digital Media, for example, and other courses. We're just starting a DH course. But one of the issues for us in trying to think about using technologies to teach that course, to put it like that, to transform our teaching or to make our teaching fit that course, to use things, if you like, is that somehow our version of where we are is quite often a little bit different from the teaching and learning people. So they will come hopping along going, everyone must use GoPros from now on. And either we have been using them and we stopped because no one could keep the iPads in the right place, or we want to use something that's better than that. So in some ways I think we're ahead, and in some ways we're behind. So we will have, we'll kind of be informed that we should be innovating in our teaching in these techie ways, but it wouldn't always be the technologies that we would actually use. And another example, for example, is why it is, I don't exactly question it, but the justification for why an old-fashioned lecture isn't enough. I accept that, actually. But on the other hand, I think there's loads of research right now about distraction and attention and why it is you watch 17 episodes of Game of Thrones in a row, right? So actually, there's a place in digital culture for sustained attention. And yet, what comes back to us, or can come back to us from the teaching and learning people, is break this down. You must interrupt yourself every 3 seconds with something that clicks. And actually, I don't think it, I think there's a way in which, because they're actually instantiating and instrumentalizing and have their extremely difficult job in a university that's too full and has a timetable and blah, of trying to make something happen, sometimes it gets very standardized. And I think actually if you come from inside those areas, you're trying to do something a bit more nuanced. So something like that. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
I don't know whether to answer, do you want me to answer or another question?
No, well, please do. Two responses. We'll take that question.
Yes, so I think it's a really interesting question. And I think that, I don't know if you know that piece of work around academic tribes, and, I think that there's a sort of sense that academics will move together as tribes, and there will be a sort of inculturation of the way in which they do things. And again, I quite like the lecture, to tell you the truth. I think it's a very interesting kind of format, but I think there are some sort of cultural dimensions to it, as there are in the essay, and I think we're only starting to question some of those cultural norms. If you ever read Gerald Graff's book about Clueless in Academe, the whole point about higher education is about producing an argument, your point here. Actually, it doesn't mean that that's an essay is necessarily the best thing, and yet people are not thinking, actually, we can try something different, or willing to take that risk. Now, I think that researchers teachers who research, or researchers who teach, are actually quite a difficult position because they've got these two hats on. And, I work with both people who've got teaching focus and people who've got research focus. And I think sometimes they just have to occupy really different kind of identities. So on the one hand, you take yourself off and you need to be very, very focused as a researcher. You need to be sort of diligent, scholarly, quiet, etc. And yet as a teacher, we're expecting this kind of amazing, dynamic kind of person who's very, very clued up, understands what their students need, helping their students. So I think it's a very, very difficult identity actually to have as an academic, doing both really, really well. I think a number of universities are now starting to understand that and produce career pathways where you've got, you can become a professor through teaching or professor through research, and you can interchange those. So actually you could, if you suddenly decide actually teaching's where I'm at, not research, then you can move into a career pathway and still do well in that sense. But you can, as long as there's some, you can move backwards and forwards, I think that's okay.